is legitimate or not. Let me bring in a super panel to talk about this, beginning with Katrina vanden Heuvel, the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine, David Zurwick, media critic for the Baltimore Sun, and Elizabeth Harrington, a staff writer at the Washington Free Beacon. Katrina, I was talking in the last block about Donald Trump's love for the media, how he knows all the moguls, knows all the bosses, and takes advantage of the press. And yet at the same time, he bullies and attacks journalists and sometimes blocks them from attending. Do you think that in this case, Trump is showing how he would act if he does become president next year?
Absolutely. Donald Trump wants to delegitimize a media that isn't giving him a wet kiss. He doesn't understand the fundamental role of free media in a democracy. It's about asking tough, probing questions. He was angry about being held accountable, holding people accountable, exposing abuses, holding the powerful accountable. Donald Trump doesn't believe in a media like that. We saw this past week, Brian, his assault on free press, rule of law, First Amendment. This is the first step on the road to an American authoritarianism. Donald Trump wasn't created by the media. We've tussled about that. But he was certainly enabled by a media which, until recently, hasn't given him enough scrutiny. Now that he's getting it because he's the presumptive nominee, look how he treats it. That is a measure of the danger we confront in Donald Trump.
Let me flip it around, though, and go to Elizabeth Harrington on this from the Washington Free Beacon, a more conservative site. Elizabeth, when I hear Donald Trump attacking the press, on one level, I think to myself, a lot of viewers out there probably agree with him, probably take his side and not the media's side. Do you think that that is why he says this again and again and again against the media?
Yeah, I think he does it because it's a winning strategy. Look, the confidence in the mainstream media, trust in the media is at all-time lows, and I think he sees that as an opportunity for a win for him, just the way he treats his opponent, the way he treated his opponents in the primary, he takes on the media in that same way. And I think it's important to keep in mind, look, I think Hillary and Donald Trump both have equal disdain for the media. They just go about it in different ways. Whereas Hillary, behind closed doors, her aides will say that she hates the press, period, and she'll literally, her campaign will keep the media behind a rope line. Trump will just go out and say it to their face, and I think a lot of journalists don't like that, but you do have to give him credit in a sense because he's out there for 45 minutes taking questions from reporters. They don't like the answers, they don't like him calling them losers, but Hillary, we haven't seen her out on the campaign trail doing a 45-minute press conference, and I think he uses it to his advantage because he gets all this attention and we keep talking about it.
I'm going to ask Clinton's press secretary about that in just a few minutes. David Zurwick, let's take this premise that conservatives in particular like hearing Trump bash the press because they don't trust the press. What do we in the media do then to win people back, to convince them that we are trustworthy and that we're not sleazy, as Donald Trump said about one reporter?
Brian, we could do good journalism. That would be the best thing we could do, and I think that goes back to your first question when you said what was he reacting to. You know, at least twice on this show, Carl Bernstein has called for the press. You essentially, don't try to compete with them in interviews and all that. You're not going to beat them. Just do dogged journalism, do investigative journalism, do biographical journalism, the kind of journalism Bernstein did, of course, but that's what he's been saying. And I think one of the reasons he went off at this press conference was because of the journalism that was done about his money for veterans. The Washington Post, the Washington Post really pushed him on it and did old-fashioned real journalism. Drew Griffin, I think, is breathing down his neck. And if you saw what he did on the VA, you know how much that's got to worry somebody. And I think that was exactly the question from ABC. Sounded very precise, the first one that you played, about how much money. You said this, but this is what we have. That's what gets under his skin. He can run circles around any interviewer in the business, although Jake Tapper gave him a real run for it on Friday, and I was really happy to see that. But this is what will get him if we continue to do it. The question is, do we have the will to do it? We have the resources, but are the owners going to spend the money to put people on him full-time to bring down those kinds of issues? You said you were going to give the vets this money, and you didn't.
Elizabeth, do you agree that strong journalism, assertive journalism about Trump and about Clinton would convert some conservative skeptics of the media?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, and conservatives give mainstream outlets credit all the time for good reporting. I mean, the New York Times story about the Clinton Foundation and the uranium deal with Russia, that was, you know, something that conservatives really pointed to. But at the same time, Trump really gets away with attacking the media when the New York Times at the same time goes after him with his treatment of women, and the main source in the story comes out the next day and says that's not what I said. So there's problems with both sides of it.
I don't think it's liberal or conservative in terms of good journalism, Brian. I think we're looking at this, in this election, we've seen a corporate media that is rigged against the public interest in certain cases.
And that's what Bernie Sanders has been saying all along.
But there are stories of executives, media executives, calling cable hosts and saying, run that Trump rally unfiltered. Why? Because media is making a lot of money on this election, on Trump
also because
in particular.
Trump makes news at rallies.
Well, what news? He's standing. There was a 12-minute segment in one of the primaries where there's an empty podium waiting for Trump to come out and hawk his steak and liquor. Why does the media cover every Donald Trump Twitter? Is that public interest? What is the public interest? It's not left or right. It's not left or right.
David, I know you're jumping in here too.
Yeah, let me jump in about something that I think would go a long way with helping conservatives feel better about this. If, when we say what a threat Trump is to the press, and he is, all the things you listed, I agree, but so far, nothing rivals President Obama did to James Risen, did to James Rosen, and did to the AP, trying to criminalize reporting. They called Rosen a criminal co-conspirator. Eric Holder wrote that to get the subpoena. They subpoenaed Risen to ask Risen what he called him. He said he's the biggest threat. The Obama administration was the biggest threat to the press in a generation. Admit that as we denounce Trump, and conservatives will feel better about this. We can't let him have you know, now President Obama is very nice to the press because he's thinking about legacy, and it's dawned on him that we're going to be writing that legacy, at least in the first or second draft. But I'm serious. What happened to the press under Obama was really deadly. And when you talk about delegitimizing, and I agree with Katrina, she's absolutely right, but think back in 2010 what he tried to do to Fox when he didn't let him into some briefings, and when he launched a campaign on reliable sources before your time against Fox, trying to cut it from the herd, delegitimize it. A lot of people might feel it should be. That's not the argument. The executive does not say what a legitimate member of the press is, and he tried to do that. That's much more dangerous.
I couldn't agree more with David. The nation has been at the forefront of, one, calling for ending this odious campaign against whistleblowers and leakers. It is a threat to our democracy. On the other hand, I think you have in President Obama someone who understands the limits of the executive and understands the role of the judiciary. But there's no question that this administration has posed a great threat to freedom of press. You've got to call it like it is. Agree with David. But at the same time, I think Trump doesn't understand the role of a press in a democracy.
Doesn't understand, or maybe just doesn't care. I wonder if it's not caring.
Oh, I think he cares deeply. I think he cares deeply about the media when it gives him a wet kiss. I mean, he's a great media manipulator. I mean, you were talking to Michael Wolff.
And that's this love-hate thing. That's the bottom line. They got to see it as both love and hate. Katrina, thank you for being here.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
Thank you.
David, Elizabeth, please stick around if you can. I want to come back to you later in the hour. We mentioned these interviews